official minutes of the meetings will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com, and a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, it's our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are values we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review the operating guidelines adopted by this board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Thank you. Ms. McManus, could you call the roll? And before you do, I see Director Tisdale has his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a moment because we learned today that one of the directors with whom I had served on this board has passed away. Barbara Deadweiler, who was a passionate and engaged member of this board, passed recently, and I would suggest that we take just a moment of silence to honor her memory and her service on the RTD board. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do that right now. Director Rivera-Malpiedi, did you want to say something?
I just want to thank Director Tisdale. I also had the honor and privilege of working with Director Deadweiler, and she held several offices within the RTD Board of Directors, was a strong advocate for her community, and will be missed. So I just wanted to also extend my condolences to her family.
Thank you. So let's take a moment and honor Director Deadweiler. Okay, thanks for that. And thank you, Directors Tisdale and Rivera-Malpiedi. Where were we? Let's call roll, Barbara McManus.
Okay, and thank you, directors, for pointing that out. I had that on my list, but as usual, you took care of it for me. Thank you. Director Bouquet. Director Broom.
Present.
Director Busick.
Here.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Deschelle. Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Present.
Director Rivera-Malpiedi.
Present.
Director Rosenthal.
Present.
Director Sloan.
Here.
Director Tisdale.
Present.
Director Whitmore.
Present.
Director Williams.
Good evening, I'm here.
Okay, we have a quorum with 13 present and 2 absent.
Great, thanks for that. And thanks everybody for being here to talk about the low, no emission bus discussion. This topic is one that's very important to the board, given environmental impact concerns, sustainability, and improving air quality for the region. The board has a vested interest in understanding how these technologies support the agency's strategic priority of community value, which is, quote, RTD strives to be a strong community partner, providing value to customers, as well as the broader Denver metro region, while sustaining planet Earth, end quote. General Manager and CEO Deborah Johnson, before we begin with the staff presentation, would you like to provide any comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good evening to all of you that are virtually assembled. I am Deborah Johnson, the General Manager and CEO here at the Regional Transportation District. Tonight, Fred Worthen, the Assistant General Manager of Bus Operations, will present information regarding the state of low and no emission bus technologies in the transit space, as well as at RTD. I would be remiss not to acknowledge that this presentation actually arose from a conversation Chair Busick and I had regarding his intent to form an ad hoc committee regarding the implementation of zero emission vehicles here at the agency. At that time, I put forward for his consideration an offer to have staff conduct a study session in which we can convey our technical knowledge of and previous experiences with low and no emissions propulsion technologies. Chair Busick was very receptive to the idea, which is what brings us here this evening. As you just heard the chair reference, that within our strategic plan, the first among our priorities is community value, meaning that RTD strives to be the strong community partner providing value to customers as well as the broader Denver metro region while sustaining planet Earth. This agency has been actively engaged in the low, no emissions vehicle conversation for some time now and has forged ahead even amidst uncertainty due to the absence of technology standards and the myriad of challenges encountered in the disparate operating environments throughout our 2,342 square mile service area. Just in April of this year, the Environmental Protection Agency recently reclassified the area along the Front Range, specifically the region stretching from Fort Collins to Castle Rock, as a severe violator of federal ozone standards. According to EPA Regional Administrator, ground level ozone remains one of the most challenging public health concerns we face, affecting large numbers of Coloradans and their families. Moreover, according to EPA data, transportation accounted for 29% of the total greenhouse gas emissions produced in the United States. Now, we all know that RTD plays a pivotal role in the reduction of greenhouse gases throughout the agency's service area. According to a Federal Transit Administration report entitled Public Transportation's Role in Responding to Climate Change, light rail systems produce on average 62% less in greenhouse gas emissions per passenger mile than an average single occupancy vehicle trip, and bus transit produces 33% less. Whether powered by internal combustion engines or alternatively fueled propulsion systems, it is important to recognize that RTD makes lives better through connections and takes cars off the road. So with that contextual background, I will now yield the floor to Mr. Worthen for his presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board, for engaging this evening.
Thanks, Jim Johnson. And Fred, before you begin, I just want to say that I think RTD can really be a leader in this space. We already have one of the largest electric bus fleets in the country. We've got more electric buses coming online. I think that even though I'm sure we're going to hear some challenges that are out there with regard to technology and so forth, I think as a board, as policymakers, we can be involved in this discussion and moving it forward. So thanks for your time. And Mr. Worthen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Busick. Good evening, honorable board members. I am Fred Worthen, Assistant General Manager of Bus Operations. Tonight, I'll start with a very high overview of the various low and no emission technologies currently utilized in the transit industry. We will transition to a discussion of our existing clean diesel and battery electric bus fleets, followed by the environmental impacts and performance of these fleets, lessons we learned with the implementation of the existing 16 Street Mall fleet battery electric bus, and where we are with our existing fleet purchases, and finally, what our next steps are in the fleet planning process. There are many forms of low and no emission technologies in usage on fixed route services within the transit industry. Clean diesel, diesel electric hybrids, and compressed natural gas technologies have been in usage for quite some time in the transit industry and are very stable technologies. Diesel engines are powered by internal combustion through a compression ignited by injection systems. Hybrid diesel systems use a conventional diesel engine in combination with an electric propulsion system. In a nutshell, the diesel engine supplies power to the bus when the demand for power exceeds the battery capacity. Diesel and hybrid diesel vehicles both use conventional fueling stations. CNG vehicles operate much like gasoline-powered vehicles with spark-ignited internal combustion engines powered by compressed natural gas. Compressed natural gas fleets require specialized fueling equipment and infrastructure. With regard to all of these technologies, there is a significant amount of information with regard to the long-term performance and cost associated with these technologies. These technologies are long range, with ranges that are typically 2 to 3 times those of electric-based technologies. These technologies make up the majority of transit fleets in operation within the United States. There are many different types of electric vehicles with very different operating characteristics. At a very high level, long-range electric battery buses are typically charged at an operating base overnight or between scheduled services. They are meant to operate over 120 miles on a single charge. En-route charging battery electric buses, also called demand charging or fast charging, are typically a short-range vehicle that is charged both on the street while in revenue service and at operating bases. Although the range is theoretically unlimited, they have to be recharged about every 15 to 20 miles of operation. They also require the availability of land, easement, and access to a power grid to support en-route charging, usually in areas where there is already little or no land available. This, in return, restricts these vehicles to areas where there is supporting infrastructure. Hydrogen fuel buses produce electricity by combining hydrogen and oxygen atoms. The hydrogen reacts with the oxygen across an electrochemical cell similar to that of a battery to produce electricity, water, and small amounts of heat. Hydrogen vehicles are refueled overnight or between scheduled services and require specialized fueling infrastructure. In Colorado, hydrogen is not widely available, but there are efforts underway to make hydrogen more readily available in our state. A few key points about these technologies. These vehicles are over twice the cost of a conventional diesel bus. The maximum range varies dependent upon the technology and bus specifications. I'll discuss range limitations later in the session. Also, these technologies are still in their infancy within the industry. They are not in widespread usage. Since these technologies are still relatively in their infancy, most fleets in operation are small and are being used primarily as pilot projects to examine the utility of the technology in operation at the local level. APTA has adopted standards for diesel-fueled vehicles. However, there are no industry-adopted standards for electric vehicle technologies. APTA has been working on developing electric bus standards, but the technology is changing rapidly, which has complicated this effort. There are also no long-term performance and cost associated with these technologies. The short-term performance and associated costs currently available vary widely based upon many factors. Manufacturers also have limited production capabilities at this time as compared to clean diesel vehicle availability. And finally, there are significant capital and infrastructure requirements to support these technologies. There are several different types of charging technologies available to support battery electric bus fleets. Long-range buses typically use plug-in slow charging technology. There are 2 different types of plug-in chargers, AC and DC. AC stands for alternating current. AC is the type of power that goes in and out of the electric grid we plug into. DC stands for direct current. That is the type of power we get from batteries like standard AA batteries used for personal electronic devices. Electric bus batteries can only store power as DC. Charging time for this technology is typically 3.5 hours from 20% to 100% capacity. Electric costs are lower if charging takes place during off-peak hours. These vehicles usually require less supporting infrastructure when compared to conductive or inductive technologies. Short-range buses typically use either a conductive or inductive charging technology. Conductive technology uses pantographs that connect directly to the top or the bottom of the bus. Drawbacks to conductive charging include space required en route to install a charger, the potential for unsightliness of a charging station, exposure of the charging station to inclement weather, and damage to the charger from other vehicles through height and clearance restrictions. Inductive charging of battery electric buses occurs wirelessly without any physical connection. This is made possible through inductive charging coils buried beneath the street level at bus stops. When an electric bus drives over the charging pad, the bus wirelessly communicates with the infrastructure to begin the charging process, sending current through the buried coil. Inductive charging technology is newer and more expensive than conductive charging, making it less common today in the United States. Additionally, inductive charging is slightly less efficient than conductive charging. Both conductive and inductive chargers are fast charging with a wide range of power levels. At the top end, a fast charge bus typically requires about 6 minutes of charge for every hour of service operated. These chargers typically have higher electrical costs due to charging during peak demand periods. Access to electricity, electrical grid capacities, and land availability can limit where these technologies can be used. Short-range vehicles typically operate on routes close to their home operating base due to range limitations. This is a very high-level overview of these technologies. Each technology has unique characteristics and operational impacts and needs. The remainder of this workshop will focus primarily on technologies currently in use at RTD, clean diesel, and long-range battery electric buses. For clarity purposes, I will refer to our current battery electric bus fleet as the mall fleet. There are many misnomers with regard to the environmental impacts of various transit bus technologies in use throughout the industry. The National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a guidebook for deploying low-emission transit buses in 2020. This guidebook was developed in cooperation with the Transit Cooperative Research Program and the Center for Transportation and the Environment. Within this guidebook, there is a recommendation that when looking at the deployment and environmental benefits, consider well-to-wheel emissions. While zero-emission buses have no harmful tailpipe emissions, there will most likely be upstream greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation for charging battery electric buses, production, and delivery for fueling. Electricity is often characterized as a clean technology. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, the primary sources of greenhouse gases in the United States are transportation and the production of electricity. The transportation sector generates the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. The largest sources of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions include passenger cars and light-duty trucks. This includes sport utility vehicles, pickup trucks, and minivans. Electricity production generates the second largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. Nationwide, approximately 62% of electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, mostly coal and natural gas. Xcel power generation in the state of Colorado is currently 61% from burning fossil fuels and 39% from renewable sources such as wind and solar power. Diesel buses are often characterized as heavy polluters of the environment. There has been significant legislation over the last 30 years to reduce particulate matter and nitrogen oxide in diesel vehicles. In 2010, the EPA's first national greenhouse gas emission standards was passed under the Clean Air Act. As a result of this legislation, diesel engines began utilizing diesel exhaust fluid. At a high level, diesel exhaust fluid is injected into the exhaust system upstream of a catalyst, where it vaporizes and decomposes nitrogen oxide, which ultimately converts the nitrogen oxide to harmless nitrogen and water. This is why you do not see black smoke billowing from newer diesel engines. This chart shows a well-to-wheel comparison of the mall fleet vehicles to 40-foot clean diesels and an average automobile. Due to the fact that Xcel primarily burns fossil fuels to generate electricity and a 16th Street Mall operating environment, our current mall fleet is not as environmentally as effective as a 40-foot clean diesel. I will discuss the mall fleet operating environment later in the session. Overall, there's virtually no environmental difference between our conventional clean burning diesel and our mall fleet. Overall, RTD's environmental footprint accounts for less than 1% of the greenhouse gases emitted by vehicles within our service area. Our real opportunity to reduce the environmental impact of pollutants stemming from vehicles is to get people out of single occupant vehicles and onto our buses. Now I'd like to spend a little time discussing the performance of our existing 16th Street Mall battery electric bus fleet and some high-level lessons that we have learned from the implementation of this fleet. The 16th Street Mall is a very unique operating environment. The service is operated along 16th Street between Denver Union Station and the Civic Center Station. This corridor is restricted primarily to mall service and pedestrians with high frequencies of service along the corridor. The mall fleet is significantly different than our regular local service fleet. These buses were custom built for the mall with an enclosed operator compartment with the operator's seat located on the right side of the vehicle. We are currently transitioning our fleet from 292 kilowatt per hour batteries to higher capacity 330 kilowatt per hour batteries. This is due to warranty-related battery degradation issues. All battery packs should be replaced by the end of this year. Before going into lessons learned, it may be helpful to understand how our existing fleet is performing compared to the 40-foot clean diesel fleet purchased during the same time period. The data and information I'm about to share is for the complete year of 2021. I do think it's important to remember that the mall operations are different than regular local service operations. Thus, we expect some variances in the performance of this fleet just strictly due to the operational differences. It's important to understand both the operational effectiveness and cost of our fleets. Overall, the fleet is more efficient from a miles per diesel gallon equivalent. The mall fleet is about twice as efficient as a comparable 40-foot clean burning diesel fleet. Although the mall is more efficient from a miles per gallon diesel equivalent standpoint, the fuel cost per mile for the mall fleet is about 30% higher than the current clean burning diesel fleet. An electric load management system was installed in January 2019. The load management system helps manage and balance maximum charging loads. Rather than charging all buses at once, the software makes decisions to charge buses in stages based upon predetermined parameters. This could be one row at a time, lowest to highest charge, and other variables. This in turn reduces electricity cost. The load management system helped lower electrical charging costs marginally. In 2019 and early 2020, RTD staff also worked with Xcel as an intervener to help create new electrical rates for electric vehicles through the Public Utility Commission hearings. This work helped lower the operational costs further, as seen in 2020 and 2021 operating cost. From a reliability standpoint, the mall fleet has experienced a higher rate of chargeable road calls than other fleet types purchased during comparable timeframes. This is comparing normalized data related to chargeable road calls. Chargeable road calls are defined as any mechanical failure that results in lost service. Auxiliary systems on the mall fleet have been among the leading reasons for chargeable road calls. There have already been multiple planetary drive failures in the mall fleet with less than 30,000 miles on those buses, leading to the manufacturer recall and the replacement of those planetary drives by the manufacturer. Additionally, a significant portion of the fleet has seen battery degradation beyond warranty requirements of 20%, leading to the previously mentioned complete replacement of the mall fleet battery packs. Maintenance costs for the mall fleet have also been higher than the 40-foot clean burning diesel fleet. The average maintenance cost for the mall fleet was $1.80 per mile compared to 54 cents per mile for the diesel fleet. The maximum range a vehicle can travel is also less when comparing the same fleets. The mall fleet can travel on average about 92 miles between full charges compared to a 40-foot transit coach that can travel about 616 miles before requiring refueling. As a note, the maximum range of any coach will vary based upon operating conditions and by individual vehicle. Oops, sorry. This chart illustrates the wide variations in range we experience during operating conditions. The blue line represents range variations for the original factory installed 290 kilowatt per hour battery packs. The red line represents the performance of the new replacement 330 kilowatt battery packs the manufacturer began installing in the fleet late last year. I'll explain why we experience these variations later in the session. The one major lesson we've learned from this is that the battery electric bus fleet has to be managed at the micro level to avoid service disruptions. I should also mention that the current electric fleet scheduled to begin production later this year will look more like a conventional 40-foot bus and will operate in a normal fixed route operating environment. Thus, we expect the performance of the new electric fleet to differ from the mall fleet. The Federal Transit Administration requires that all large-size, heavy-duty vehicles be kept for 12 years or 500,000 miles before a vehicle is eligible for replacement. Before making a decision to purchase any vehicle, it's recommended that a comprehensive review of technology available is done. Choosing any technology, vendor, and infrastructure will more than likely lock an agency into a long-term commitment to a chosen path, so choose wisely. Remember, the agency is buying a complete system, not just a type of bus. Choosing hastily may lead to costly mistakes and unanticipated consequences. Testing and developing operational plans is important as the technology chosen impacts many factors, such as the capital requirements, operational cost, and how we train our workforce to support the technology. With regard to assessing technology, understand the cradle-to-grave environmental impacts. Look beyond tailpipe emissions and examine complete life cycle impacts from cradle to grave. Develop goals and strategies that reduce the entire carbon footprint for the technology chosen, and understand the cost and replacement impacts. Choosing whether a fast or slow charge is appropriate, or a combination of both, is highly dependent upon operating conditions, land and infrastructure availability, and associated cost. It's also important to evaluate and plan for impacts on infrastructure. Our operating bases are very old, and scheduled upkeep in our asset management program has fallen behind. As a result, significant infrastructure improvements are needed to support electrification efforts. As an example, electrical upgrades will need to be made at operating bases and remote charging location. Determining who pays for those upgrades and how much lead time is needed for these upgrades is also an important part of the process. It's important to understand local, state, and federal regulations and expect your electrical provider to pass along some or all of external infrastructure upgrade costs to the agency. RTD paid Xcel about $450,000 for infrastructure upgrades to connect the bus manufacturer supplied charging systems for the mall fleet to the Xcel transformer. Installing a separate electrical meter for the electric fleet is also necessary. This will help with tracking operational costs and monitoring the effectiveness of electrical load management systems. Facility space planning is also an important part of the process. Charging equipment have varying footprints and can take up a lot of space. Parking and facility utilization is restricted once the infrastructure is installed. It's important to do due diligence during the procurement cycle. Operating environments and conditions impact vehicle performance. One major lesson learned is that staff should not depend upon manufacturer performance data to project how the fleet will perform in our operating environment. Planning for charging systems and associated infrastructure is a critical step in the assessment process. Consider energy resiliency. Plan for power outages and develop a system that allows for flexibility in charging vehicles. Some form of smart charging or charger control is required to reduce energy cost and ensure that buses are charged adequately prior to deployment. This will more than likely have impacts on how we park, charge, and assign vehicles for revenue service. Ensure charging equipment meets all relevant certification requirements and that local inspectors are familiar and comfortable with the equipment. This was problematic for RTD when installing chargers for the mall fleet, as local inspectors required additional equipment certification before allowing installation. Ensure interoperability for future bus purchases. Specify and procure open architecture to the greatest extent possible. Interoperability between different manufacturers' buses was not a consideration when purchasing the mall buses, but it will be for future electric transit bus purchases. While the mall bus charging plugs and use of AC power has operational advantages, it limits the vehicles that can use this infrastructure in its current state to just the current manufacturer. As previously mentioned, the price of a 40-foot battery electric bus is more than double the cost of 40-foot clean-burning diesel vehicles. This can have a significant financial impact when purchasing large quantities of vehicles. With regard to infrastructure, Plan for current and future growth needs. This includes examining operational facilities and working with the local electrical provider to ensure adequate infrastructure is in place. Understand all infrastructure costs. As previously mentioned, our operating bases are very old and in need of asset upgrades. Charging systems alone can range in price from $60,000 to $150,000 a unit for in-depot chargers. Costs associated with electrical capacity upgrades of facilities could be substantial and will be driven by the technology chosen. Other support assets, such as lifts and hoists, may need to be upgraded or replaced as well. Plan appropriate lead time for infrastructure upgrades. It took about a year to upgrade the Platte Bus Operating Division and external electrical public utilities infrastructure to support the housing of the existing mall fleet. Workforce development and training is a necessity to ensure the successful implementation of any fleet. As previously mentioned, if an electric fleet is chosen during the process, the agency is purchasing a complete system, not just a vehicle. The technical knowledge needed to successfully implement an electric fleet is completely different than a conventional clean burning diesel. As an example, operating training requires a shift in both driving habits and operational awareness. Electric buses depend upon regenerative braking to increase operational range. Regenerative braking systems cause the electric motor to run in reverse mode and run backwards. This process reclaims and stores kinetic energy generated by the system for further use. During the regenerative process, the motor slows the wheels and also acts as an electricity generator. To maximize operational range, operators have to shift from traditional braking habits to a different driving style that allows the regenerative braking system to work and help recharge the batteries. Vehicle maintenance technicians need to be trained on high voltage systems and new diagnostic support systems. Training on the safe handling and tag out of high voltage systems is a critical safety component. Chargers and infrastructure also require regular maintenance. Charger-specific training and documentation is necessary for the proper training of facilities maintenance technicians. The lack of industry-adopted standards requires specific technical knowledge when procuring electric buses. Additionally, separate procurements may need to be issued to support charging and infrastructure requirements, which requires careful project management to ensure infrastructure is in place before the new fleet arrives. Parking configurations, charging equipment limitations, and range limitations require those that manage the fleet to have an in-depth knowledge of operational issues and to actively manage the yard and fleet at a micro level. It's also critical to develop appropriate IT strategies. Protecting the agency from hardware and software obsolescence is a step often overlooked. It's important to require systems that are open architecture and reduce reliance on a particular manufacturer or provider. This includes onboard, charging, and diagnostic systems. Ensure that vendors guarantee supporting any technology beyond the expected life of the vehicle. Consider requiring software escrow to ensure the continuity of your IT hardware and software infrastructure. First responders also need to know shutdown locations at both the bus and the facilities and what hazardous materials are in usage. Develop guides for first responders and invite them to train with the new equipment. Understanding the operational impacts of any technology chosen is important. This includes range limitations and battery degradation issues. The operational range of a vehicle is impacted by many variables. Operating speed, operator driving habits, terrain, frequency of stops, auxiliary electrical loads, and heating and air conditions systems impact vehicle range. The mall fleet has regularly experienced a 30 to 50% variation in range, as previously discussed. Planning for battery degradation is also important. Over time, the maximum charge electric fleet batteries can carry begins to degrade, which will impact the performance and range of an electric vehicle. I will discuss battery degradation shortly in the session. Developing operational processes and fleet management plans based upon worst-case scenarios is also critical. Between normal operational range variations and normal battery degradation, it's anticipated the vehicles will have less and less range as they age. Examine fleet mixes and develop a transaction plan. Most experience with fixed route electric vehicles is limited to 30 and 40-foot vehicles. Plans to transition to a revenue fleet to an electric fleet should follow a systems engineering approach that considers capacity constraints, range limitations, spare ratio impacts, infrastructure requirements, and associated cost. Understand how your contractor operations will be impacted. At RTD, 45 to 48% of fixed route services are contractor operated at 4 different operating bases that RTD does not own. These contracts are typically 3 years in duration with 2 additional 1-year options. Electrifying facilities that RTD does not own presents unique issues in itself. The Federal Transit Administration typically restricts fleets to a maximum 20% spare ratio based upon peak vehicle requirements for service provision. Due to range and other technical limitations, large-scale electrification does not come at a 1-to-1 vehicle replacement ratio, which could lead to a larger fleet and fleet spare ratio. Exemptions to spare ratio requirements are subject to approval by the local regional FTA office. Public education is also required. Conducting outreach to educate the public on the new fleet is critical. For example, low emission vehicles typically do not make a lot of noise. So a person who is visually impaired may not recognize that a vehicle is actually approaching a stop. For daily operation, by itself. Plan for daily operational impacts. For example, if an operating base were to lose power for an extended period of time, how would we operate and support scheduled service? Understanding operational impacts begins with the understanding of the nuances of the technology selected and what the impacts are of the technology over time. For example, the performance of a new battery pack on a battery electric bus changes over time. New batteries are generally limited with regard to how much of a battery charge can be accessed for operations. Within the mall fleet, alarms signal when a battery reaches 20% charge. Once alarms sound, the performance of the vehicle begins to erode. As batteries get older, they begin to experience degradation. A new battery that previously generated 300 kilowatt hours of electricity with 20% degradation will only be able to hold 288 kilowatt hours of charge. As previously mentioned, batteries already have variable operating ranges based upon auxiliary unit usage, terrain, driver skills, and other factors. When stacking normal variability on top of degradation, the distance and performance of vehicle will be significantly reduced and impacted over time. So how does battery performance impact daily operations? This chart is a very good example how variations in climate, topography, driving style, and battery degradation impact daily operation. The example in this chart shows the range of a new battery versus a degraded battery on a block of work. In transit terms, a block of work is the work assignment for a vehicle day from base pullout into service and through pull into the base at the end of service. The first set of lines on the left side of the chart, starting at 500, indicates that a newly fully charged battery under optimal conditions can enter service at 6:08 a.m. and stay in service till nearly 6 p.m. at night. However, the same battery, fully charged but exposed to variations in geography, climate, and driving style, could have to end service as early as 3:08, about 3 hours earlier. Auxiliary systems to power heating and cooling systems and the inability to fully optimize the regenerative braking system can severely reduce the operational distance of a vehicle. Over time, as the kilowatt hour capacity of the vehicle diminishes, degradation further reduces the distance the vehicle travels. The second line on the left side of the vehicle, of the chart, starting at 350, illustrates that degradation, accompanied by the drain of auxiliary systems and diminished return from the regenerative braking systems, reduces the amount of time the vehicle can be in revenue service. In a worst case scenario, this vehicle could need to be removed from revenue service as early as 12:15 p.m. This illustrates about a 50% reduction in revenue service provision from best case scenarios to worst case scenarios. This will lead to increased operational cost and impacts. In this example, this piece of work will require 2 to 3 vehicles to complete the scheduled revenue service. This leads to increased deadhead and pre-trip inspection time and may require more operators. I should point out that even under optimal conditions, this block of work could not be completed by a single electric vehicle. A diesel vehicle could complete this entire piece of work on a single tank of fuel. Going back to our original point, it's very important to understand and plan for impacts on daily operations. Studies regarding fleet electrification have focused on the cost and performance of this technology. These studies have not focused on other direct and indirect operational impacts and cost. This chart illustrates the impact of a single vehicle operating in service on a single day. So let's expand this point. Route 15 and 15L operate on the East Colfax corridor. This is one of our busiest routes that begins service each day at 3:30 a.m. and continues in service through 2 a.m. the next day. This route requires 36 peak buses operating nearly 600 hours of daily service. Looking at the variability of this slide, think of how that would transfer on a larger scale, such as Route 15 operations. As you can see from this chart, it requires more electric buses to do a single block of work. Each time a bus pulls out from an operating bus, time has to be added to pre-trip, post-trip, and travel time from an operating base. This increases the number of hours paid for service operations. On a larger scale, this means additional buses and support staff, such as operators, mechanics, and service and cleaning personnel, and possibly even more operating bases to operate the same level of service maintained by our diesel fleet. Electric vehicles can also take up to 4 hours to recharge, which impacts vehicle availability and maintenance programs. Now expand that thought further to over 100 routes, a fleet of over 700 buses, housed and maintained at 7 different operating bases. Understanding life cycle and operational direct and indirect cost is critical to any agency. Operational costs will vary widely depending upon the unique temperature, terrain, and energy cost and pricing structures of the jurisdiction. Do not assume the experience of other transit systems will transfer to our system. Making a decision without understanding full cost could lead to very costly mistakes that impact the financial and operational sustainability. It's important that staff does not depend upon operational costs provided by vehicle manufacturers and other transit systems. Current battery electric buses have not been in usage for an extended period of time. There are also no long-range costs available for life cycle cost analysis. The current technology is too new. Obtaining a life cycle and operational cost model that is accurate for our operating environment may be hard to accurately predict. Finally, understand indirect costs. Operational management plans may require increased staffing, increases in service hours, or simply require more capital investments. Although it may be tempting to pursue grants and wide-scale implementation of battery electric buses, a wise approach is to test and develop operational plans before engaging in large-scale purchases. Things to consider when developing and test and operational plans include electric vehicles require a completely new business model, develop training and operating models that adapt to your electric fleet capabilities and constraints, test in your operating environment to better understand operational constraints and cost, develop stage plans for implementing electric vehicles, and develop specific learning goals for any purchase to support future purchases. Utilizing all of the lessons learned from our current mall fleet implementation and operations, we've put together a cross-functional team to guide the development and implementation of the currently approved 17 battery electric buses scheduled to begin production later this year. Buying an alternative fuel vehicle is significantly more work than simply writing specifications for a vehicle, buying the vehicle, and placing it into daily operations. Staff spent about 2 years doing the work shown before engaging in the procurement process. As previously mentioned, the agency is buying a complete system, not just a bus. Engaging with Xcel early in the process was very important to this project to help ensure power and infrastructure will be available when the electric fleet arrives. This is a step that is often overlooked during purchases, leading to project delays. The procurement process is much more intensive than a regular diesel bus procurement. Developing specifications for the bus and infrastructure, preparing for infrastructure upgrades, and working with the local utilities vendor is critical to the success of the program. From a procurement standpoint, it is advantageous to issue a separate infrastructure procurement to contain project cost and ensure infrastructure meets current and future needs. There are also other infrastructure upgrades needed to support electric bus technology. As an example, battery electric buses generally have very, very heavy battery packs on the roof of the vehicle. At East Metro, where our new electric buses will be located, we have to install specialized lifts, hoist, and fall restraint systems to work on the battery packs located on the vehicle's roof. We also have to ensure that all equipment is functional for current and future vehicle purchases. Staff spent about 1 year developing the vehicle and infrastructure requirements for this project. The final stage is to implement and test the technologies chosen. This includes developing operational plans, training plans, and comparing modeling work to our actual experience. Plan, do, check, act. All of this work will help us to evaluate the utility of battery electric buses at a larger scale and develop a refined long-range plan for electric vehicles. We're taking all of these lessons learned and applying them to our current battery electric bus procurement underway. We currently have 17 battery electric buses that are scheduled to begin production later this year, with delivery anticipated in the first quarter of 2023. I should mention there is a national shortage of computer components and batteries. This could impact the delivery schedule of these vehicles. Once we receive the new electric vehicles, we will store and maintain them at our East Metro operating base. We anticipate installation of the equipment, infrastructure, and facility upgrades beginning late in the third quarter of 2022. We will commission charging equipment and infrastructure when the new electric bus fleet is delivered. Utilizing all of the lessons learned from our mall fleet, the current battery electric bus fleet procurement, and other work done by staff and consultants, we will be engaging in long-range fleet planning efforts over the next couple of years. This will include looking at the utility of alternative fueled vehicles and clean diesel technologies more holistically and in greater detail. Due to the fact that alternative fueled vehicle technology is constantly changing, this will be an ongoing effort for all future vehicle procurements. Thank you for your time this evening. I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Worthen, for that presentation. Let's start with director questions and comments. I see Director Davidson first in the queue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Worthen, that was an awesome presentation. I so appreciate the system level thinking, involving the grid. And, one of my questions was going to be about that early engagement with Xcel. And I'm glad to see that we have a lot of that. One of the questions I have, this is exciting stuff. I'm trying to sort through my questions here, but one of the questions I have is about performance. So certainly, the manufacturers have warranties with us. But when it comes to not only range, but even specifications, their mean time between failure and specifications regarding repair. I know this is one of the things that's really hard to pin down in the absence of standards, but could you speak to what's in our contracts and how we're approaching, performance requirements from vendors, and what what tools we have to renegotiate with them based on any performance issues that we notice?
Thank you for that question, Director Davidson. I will say that we worked with the Center for Transportation and the Environment to develop the standards for our fleet that we purchased and will begin actual production later this year. There are so many different things in the standards that I could speak to that I think I could take the rest of the evening talking to that. I would be more than happy to share the requirements of the procurement, though, with you and the board as a whole. With regard to overall standards, though, we do have specific standards with regard to things like battery degradation. We do have replacement requirements when a vehicle does have performance issues, such as if a battery degrades below 80%. The requirement to rebuild or replace a battery is part of that actual procurement requirements itself. And then we also have a negotiated contract that we have set with each one of our vendors. We do have extended warranties. I believe that the battery packs have required a 12-year warranty on them, but I'll check on that to make sure that I'm speaking to that correctly. And then we have other performance-related things in there too, with regard to things like anticipated range. So those types of things are within our existing contract and within our existing procurement. With regard to if there are problems with performance, we typically work with the vendor and try to cure those one-on-one. So for example, with our existing fleet, when we started having problems with the planetary drive failures, we went to the vendor and explained the problems. They came in and did an analysis. They declared that we had a problem and they recalled and replaced those planetary drives voluntarily. So starting to work with the vendor is our first step. But of course, if worse comes to worse, we always have cure issues and legal issues that we can take with the vendor. My experience has been with our vendors, though, that we have worked with in the past, that when we bring a problem to them, they are more than willing to work with us and try to find alternatives and solutions.
Director Davidson, does that take care of your questions? You're still on mute. Okay, must have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that it very much answers my questions, and appreciate that. I'll come back around.
Great, thanks. Director Rosenthal, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Worthen, for that really exhaustive presentation, no pun intended. Sorry, I thought I'd get a chuckle out of that one. Nevertheless, so I have two questions for you. One is in regards to, I believe one of the slides was talking about emissions, and that you said there was really no or very little difference between an electric bus and a clean diesel bus. And I was wondering a little bit more about that, those statistics, how they're generated, and in particular, since if you look at how our power is increasingly being generated by renewable resources, and less and less, and long-term less and less, especially with Xcel, is going to be as they shut down their coal-fired power plants and continue to use to some extent their natural gas power plants. So if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. So I do want to clarify. First off, the emissions reductions with the mall fleet is less than we anticipate we will get with the new fleet. And part of the reason that the mall fleet does not perform as well is going back to the part of regenerative braking. The mall fleets, since they stop every block, they really don't get a chance to fully utilize regenerative braking. So we really don't get the miles per gallon diesel equivalent, which helps reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. With regard to the calculations, though, we use the Argonne National Laboratory Heavy Duty Vehicle Emissions Calculator. The amount of emissions, particulate, and pardon me, I'm reading the description here because I knew this question was going to come up. The amount of emissions reductions, particulate matter, nitrous oxides, and greenhouse gas emissions of an electric bus can be compared to that of a diesel bus. The model considers the emissions from production and transport of each fuel type, tailpipe emissions, and power plant emissions to create electricity to charge the electric bus. This is based on Xcel's Colorado power generation makeup. And then I explained a little bit about the mall, how the regenerative part reduces some of the efficiency too. But I think going back to the particulate matter component though too with regard to emissions reductions. The chart that I showed that showed the NOx and particulate matter that was occurring 20 years ago, we've really reduced, the industry has reduced particulate matter and NOx through the diesel exhaust fluid component itself. By injecting the diesel exhaust fluid into the catalytic converter systems, we've basically taken harmful emissions and turned them into water and non-harmful emissions. So the diesel vehicles actually emit these days very little particulate and NOx.
And I appreciate that answer. But given that, what is the proportion of the newer versus older buses in our stock at RTD? So the older buses emitting more, the newer buses emitting less. I mean, do we weigh more heavily towards the newer ones? And what does newer mean? Newer meaning, you know, in the last 5 years, 10 years. So if you don't mind speaking to that.
So going back to compare these, we actually compared vehicles that were purchased during a similar time frame as the mall itself. So that was the 2000, I believe it were 2015 and 16 vehicles were the closest to the electric fleet purchase that we made. The electric buses were received by RTD in 2018. We do have some older vehicles, but I would point out that a good portion of our older vehicles will be cycling out this year. We have 100 plus vehicles that are on order right now. So that will lead the average fleet closer to the statistics that are within that chart.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, one final question, and perhaps this is something the General Manager Johnson might be able to answer. To be direct and straightforward, I mean, just based on some of the conclusions I know Mr. Wortham was more presenting facts, but does one also come to the conclusion that perhaps having just clean diesel buses is more cost effective if there's no substantial reason from an air pollution standpoint that there are issues with installation and with ongoing costs and less miles traveled on a charge? And I'm not saying I agree, I'm just saying I'd like to hear your perspective whether we should put a hold on any future purchases of electric vehicles from those perspective. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Director Rosenthal, I appreciate the question. I will qualify my answer by saying I believe that we have to be innovative and open to new ideas and continuous improvement. And what Mr. Wortham was presenting was showcasing where we are currently as an organization, because there is an opportunity for us to optimize how we're delivering transit services. As we talk about our vehicles, our facilities, we need to ensure that we have facilities that are in a state of good repair that can be easily adaptable and scalable to look at alternatively fueled propulsion systems. Additionally, as we look at how we do our service planning, we have, a myriad of routes that are very long in length. And there's a couple of different decision points. Do we want to leverage inductive charging? As I shared previously, you may be aware that, having come from California, we looked at these various things because there is an innovative clean transit regulation put forward by the California Air Resources Board. So where we need to go as an organization is have a transition plan, because utilizing that to determine various factors, I believe you as a board will have more information to make informed decisions about our fleet type, because we could have sub fleets and we could have them operating in a myriad of different places. However, we need to identify the problem for which we're trying to solve. And if that is reducing greenhouse gases by a certain amount, then we can do that. And tactically speaking, we can identify the best means in which to accomplish that goal. So does that address your question, sir?
It does, and thank you very much for that answer. And I look forward to the other directors and their questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Director Williams, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Let me get myself here on the bus. That was great. And Mr. Worthen, thank you so much. The only problem I have is that there are 12 or 13 or however many directors and 20 or however many staff, and who needs to hear this is the rest of the world. I'm wondering if there are any plans to make this presentation to a Dr. Cog meeting, to a Metro Mayor's meeting, to a City Council meeting, because you know, it's great that we know it. We already love you and we already love RTD, but I really like to see this get out to the rest of the world so that people understand the big picture that we are looking at and the fact that we are looking at it. So General Manager Johnson, thank you for having your staff look at this holistically, and that's my request, is that we would do this wonderful presentation all over town. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Williams. Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple questions. Since you're talking about basing the new electric buses out at the bus barn on East Colfax, does it make sense to then assign those buses to the 15 route so that you're not having to put facilities all over the district to support electric buses? I mean, you know, to have a bus run out of juice up in Longmont, that's a long way to send a wrecker to haul them back in. That's one question. Then the second question is that we kind of totally ignored here today is, what is the future availability of diesel fuel? I mean, it's going towards probably $8 a gallon. Are we going to have to construct a tank farm to buy millions of gallons when it becomes available off season or something like that to ensure that we'll have diesel fuel year round? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may answer.
Please, Fred. Yes.
So to your original point, Director Broom, thank you for that question. When we made a decision to look at where to house the vehicles, we did what we would call a block analysis. And as I described a little earlier, block is basically the assignment of a vehicle from the beginning of the day when it starts service all the way through the end of the day. And what we did is we analyzed blocks of service based upon the anticipated range that we'll be able to get out of the new electric fleet. So we actually won't be assigning to routes. We will be assigning those buses to blocks where we believe that they can complete revenue service. With regard to the future availability of diesel fuel, I'm not sure that anybody can answer that question at this point. I appreciate the question, and I think as we talked about future vehicle purchases, we have to constantly evaluate what we're buying and what technology we're buying from, you know, and if diesel vehicle prices change dramatically as we look at future procurements, that would be taken into account.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Worthen. Thank you, Director Broom. Does that answer your questions?
No, not really, but I didn't expect an answer. Thanks.
Yeah. Sounds good. Director Cook.
Thanks. I was thinking somebody else was ahead of me. Two quick ones. The maintenance cost per mile was surprising to me because you always hear about the electric vehicles being less costly to maintain. And part of that may stem from the unique nature of the mall shuttle versus an average of all the diesel routes that we operate. And so is there a way, you know, to compare more apples to apples, to compare, for example, our average for diesel cost over all the routes with an agency's routes where an agency has been able to electrify a broader range of its routes, or by comparing to maintenance cost per revenue service hour or something? Is there a way to look at it more equivalently? That's my first question, Fred.
Well, with regard to the maintenance cost per miles, first and foremost, again, going back to what I spoke of, when you buy an electric vehicle, you're not just buying a electric component, you're buying the complete system.
Mhm.
One of the issues that we are experiencing is that the auxiliary systems put a very heavy strain on the electric vehicle itself. So we've seen component failures like our doors. That have led to problems with low charge. We've also seen premature failures with equipment, such as the planetary drive failures that I spoke of earlier. And we've seen even battery degradation issues that we did not anticipate. With the fleet only being basically in service 5 years, we anticipated that we wouldn't hit warranty problems for some time. So again, the technology is so new that there's really no experience to rely on what the performance of equipment is going to be. With regard, though, to looking at peers, you can't transfer what a peer's experience will be to ours. And that is one thing that has been learned in the industry very, very quickly. Between differences in terrain, topography, all of the other things, specific specifications on a vehicle, everybody has a different story to tell. I think that when you start talking about normalizing costs and things like that, miles per gallon diesel equivalency, that's an industry standard thing that's done. Miles between road calls, those are industry standards. So everything that I presented with regard to performance metrics are apt to standards that are used industry-wide.
My second question isn't really, I mean, it's kind of in the arena, but I'm stretching a little bit. The question, hopefully somebody who's on the call can answer this. We're reviewing the guidelines that we have that would allow our customers to electrify their fleets and take advantage of the last and first mile, like on e-bikes. What's our time frame for hopefully being able to loosen that a bit to enable people to take electric bikes or scooters when they work on our fleet? What's your time frame for completing that review?
General Manager Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Director Cook, oh my God, this is serendipitous. I just had a conversation with Marta Sapecki this morning about this. And so I asked her to get with Bill Van Meter. We're actually having a discussion tomorrow. So we recognize when this policy was first put into place, we were talking about combustible engines and things of the like. So I would say, and I'll double back with you, that we probably would have an understanding of what our policy is once we look at the safety aspects. I'd probably say within 4 weeks, but I will double back with you if the time is different, because I don't want to misspeak without having had the opportunity to speak with tech staff collectively.
Super. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much. That's all I have.
Thanks, Director Cook. Director Geisinger. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much, Mr. Worth, and that was a really informative and an excellent presentation. I have a few questions. I know there's so much going on in the state. The SB 260 created the Clean Transit Enterprise. They've just come out with an adopted 10-year plan that I think set a $135 million goal for them to raise towards clean transit in the next few years. There's a state goal of 1,000 electric vehicles by 2030 and a state ZEV transit roadmap. Are we involved in those projects and those planning efforts?
Yes, thank you, Director Geisinger. We have been involved in all of those different efforts. If you would like detailed information with regard to our involvement, I would have to defer to Mr. Bill Van Meter, since his staff has been working directly on those initiatives. Okay.
And are those, I guess, are we coordinating those with our efforts in terms of moving forward with electric buses and all of those things? It looks like Ms. Johnson might have something there. Oh, there's Mr. Van Meter.
Good. Okay. And Mr. Van Meter is here, so I was going to have him speak to this. We had just had a conversation as well as relates to our coordinated approach, especially with the projections that Dr. Cog has put forward for the region. But I will yield the floor to Mr. Van Meter because I'm certain he can address this question. And if I need to add some supplemental information, I will do so. So Mr. Van Meter. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll have to state that I would prefer to have conversations with my staff and get back to you before I misstate where we are and what our level of coordination and discussions are on this topic. I don't have good information to share at this juncture at this evening, so you got
Understandable.
me flat-footed.
Okay.
If I may, so what we'll do as staff is circle back in reference to the questions that were posed by Director Cook in regards to the e-bike policy and all the questions, so we can provide a summarized document that provides the answers to the questions of which we don't have responses to at this juncture.
Great, thank you very much. And just following up on Director Williams' comment, I think, if we can take some of this to those groups, we would inform them and they may inform us as well. Again, Ms. Johnson, you have something on that?
Right. I just wanted to share, I appreciate Director Williams' comment. And as Mr. Worthing knows, we were invited to participate and present at the Colorado Energy Office and other places, and we knew we had this coming. So, in respect for this board, we wanted to bring this here first. But yes, totally support what Director Williams said, and with your further reiteration of that, that's what we do intend going forward, but needed to garner a better understanding of what the board's pleasure was as we go forward. So we appreciate that input.
That's great. And I'm glad to hear you're coordinating with the Colorado Energy Office too. I don't know exactly, if the Clean Transit Enterprise, I think that's in CDOT, but I'm not, but I think all of those pieces, as I say, we can inform them and they can inform us. So I think that'll be great. We learned a lot of lessons from the mall shuttle, but I also appreciate what you were saying, Fred, that I'm excited about the new 17 buses that we've ordered, because everything's changing so quickly. The original Nissan Leaf got a 70-mile range, and now they're at 230, and other cars are at 350 and 400. So I think looking at the newer vehicles and some of it may be specs from the manufacturers, and I hear what you say that you can't totally rely on them, but maybe some of these other organizations in the state can help and give us a little better picture of the opportunities with the battery electric buses. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Director Tisdale, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just on that last point, in terms of projected miles and so forth, let's not forget that we also bought buses with a 12-year guaranteed battery life. And as I understand it, after 5 years, we're having issues. So, manufacturers always do overstate. I was struck by so many things in this presentation that you pulled together, and I hope, by the way, that you'll be able to share your slide deck with all of us, because there was outstanding stuff in that, Fred. It was really just very, very compelling, and I think responds to a lot of questions. And when I hear Director Williams say we've got to talk to other people about this, I think that's right, because people look at us and say, well, how come you haven't been all over this? How come you haven't got nothing but electric buses? And being able to say, it's a problem. And we're dedicated to the proposition of improving air quality. But as it turns out, our air quality improvement has come about in large part by something called clean diesel. So I think that's fantastic. I think people, when they talk about electric vehicles of any sort, fail to take into account what you pointed out, that about 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we experience are from the generation of electricity. So it's great to say, yes, the vehicle is electric and it'll run, but we had to do a lot of dirt to get that electricity made, and that's something that we need to address. I am very cautious about the fact that the upfront cost for the BEBs is roughly double what we pay for a clean diesel bus. It is it's something that in seeing your chart about the NOx emissions and so forth, I think, again, people just don't know. So at least if we could tell them that and say, we think the electric vehicle market is slowly but surely catching up, but we're not going to run off. I submit that we should not run off and just say, yes, we're making a commitment now that every new bus we get is going to be electric, because that would be, I think, a foolhardy move. And we need to assess the ROI on all of this, our return on investment. What is it really like for converting to an electric fleet? That's why the one thing that made my heart sing was when you said we're doing a study, a comprehensive study to look at all these factors that we'll come back to you with. But this is at least a good introduction for all of us. And I think, as Director Williams points out, it's an introduction that we really should share with Dr. Cog and Metro Mayors, because they will help communicate that message to the rest of our public in the Regional Transportation District. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. And I guess the takeaway I got from this is understand the challenges with the electrification, but move forward slowly, incrementally, understanding those, and not run away from them because of the challenges. So, okay, Secretary Sloan, you're up.
Thank you. And this is a follow on to Director Tisdale and your comment, Chair. We have talked about the electrification of buses based on Xcel's generation practices. And this is outside of the scope of this particular presentation, but I think it would be helpful for the public in general, and certainly myself, to understand the possibilities for generating our own electricity, through solar panels on right-of-way for RTD, on our maintenance facilities, to see if that can change the calculation in any way. So that would be, another step in this analysis. But again, I appreciate what we have before us today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Secretary Sloan. Director Catlin, now Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fred, I benefited from a presentation that you gave to a few of us board members, probably 2.5, 3 years ago. And what I learned from that presentation was that technology is ever evolving, and that we are taking steps to proceed, understanding that this technology is evolving. What impressed me with your presentation tonight was your system-wide approach and educating the board that this isn't just a plug and play. When public says, why don't you just do electric vehicles? You really have to go through a very, very thorough analysis and thought process in moving forward. And I very much appreciated your presentation. And I agree with many of the directors that said these are good steps forward, but we want to proceed in a very, very deliberate way that understands all of the trade-offs. And I just am impressed from the evolution of where you came from pre-COVID 2.5 or 3 years ago when I sat through that presentation and where you are now. It was very impressive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Director Rosenthal, one more time.
Sorry for a quick confirmation statement / question, and perhaps the general manager might be able to confirm this. I asked a while back about diesel prices, and this speaks to Director Broom. And my understanding is we have contracts on the purchase of diesel. that are longer term, and that sort of, you know, evens out the amount that we are paying for our diesel, clean diesel. So and I don't know how long those contracts are they 6 months, a year, 2 years, and to the extent that, how does that address Director Broom's question? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that question, Director Rosenthal. Yes, we do lock diesel prices each year, typically around the August or September timeframe of each year. We look at diesel prices, we make a determination on what we can and what we're willing to pay, and then we work with our vendor to actually lock in prices. So, and it's advantageous to us. If prices are below the lock price, we get a little bit of a break, but if they go above the lock price, then we're locked in at that upper cap level. So the lock does help stabilize the cost over the budget cycle for the single year that we're in operation, but we do renew those diesel locks every year.
Great, thanks for that. And Mr. Worthen, thanks so much again for the presentation. Thanks everyone for being here. I guess I'll make my comments since I'm last here. A couple of things were raised. I know First Vice Chair Geisinger raised the concept of the quick evolution in this technology. And it always seems that new technologies evolve very, very quickly at the onset, as opposed to, you know, diesel technology that's been around forever. It has evolved really slowly to where it is now. And so that's why any full fleet replacement to zero emission vehicle is probably decades into the future, even with the advanced rate of technology improvements. The three big things that I think are critically important are cost, charging, and range. Those are the big three that are preventing us from moving forward, you know, quickly. And the other one, and GM CEO Johnson was on a panel that I attended at the Denver Athletic Club. The fact that there are no industry adopted standards with regard to these fleets means the prices are all over the place when it comes to this technology. And once you get some industry standards that all these manufacturers have to comply with, then you're going to see prices probably come down pretty dramatically. So I think that's really important. And APTA has a zero emission fleet committee that a former member employee of RTD is the chair of, I understand. So that might be something for us to follow as we move forward. I'd love to do this again in December, the first week of December, if we could, to get an update and also to get a plan on the integration of the 17 battery electric buses we're getting. Because I presume that if we anticipate them coming the first quarter of 2024, maybe we ought to have an integration plan, and maybe we can get some updates on that and see where things are moving forward. I'd like to try to keep this top of mind. And you know, for directors, for policy considerations, yeah, we can't just say replace our fleet. We can't afford that. But you know, maybe we say anytime there's a bus order, of all the diesel buses, maybe 5% of them are going to be electric. I mean, think about things like that to slowly but surely begin the integration process. Anyway, something to think about. Thanks again, General Manager Johnson, Mr. Worthen, all the other staff that were in attendance for support. Really appreciate you being here. Directors, thanks for your inquiring minds and your comments. And with no further hands raised, we'll say good night and goodbye.